I threw this in because in September in the Highlands in England, the heather's in bloom. So everywhere you looked, you saw this purple flower, and in places it was just quite beautiful because the whole hillside would just be blanketed in this lovely sort of pale purple color. This is Patterdale, the church, the main street of Patterdale, and the White Lion Inn. I didn't stay here. I stayed in the bed and breakfast, but a lot of hikers stay in the White Lion. And then this is the way out. So on that diagonal path I showed you in an earlier slide, I'm now up near the top of that and heading out of Patterdale and looking back. And again, it was another rainy day. If you hike in England, you have to prepare for rain. That's what the weather's like. This is the top of that path. When you get up and over the ridge there, you come down to this little lake called Angle Tarn, and then the path goes around the lake and up over the other side. And then I walked into fog and got completely lost, because not only is there one path, there's several paths, and then there's all the sheep paths. And fortunately, as I was walking along in the fog, I saw two other gentlemen who were obviously lost because they were standing there consulting a map. And the three of us figured out where we were and had to backtrack and find the right path. So I was very glad I ran into them. But what we also discovered when we looked down at our feet is we were standing on this path, which was in fact an old Roman road. So this had been a road that the Romans had built to get lead and tin out of the Lake District down to the coast to be loaded onto ships and sent to different places in their empire. So it was kind of interesting to be walking on a path that was thousands of years old, that people had used in earlier times for industrial purposes. And this is coming down the other side. This was the worst part of my walk because there was a really long, again, the scale's hard to see, but it took me about half an hour to walk from where I'm standing down to the lake, and it was downhill steep all the way. And by the end of this day, my feet were wet. I had multiple blisters. My toenails were turning black, and it was a real mess. So I didn't really expect that. I thought it would be an easier walk. Coming out of the Lake District, it suddenly gets very flat and green. This was an old pack horse bridge that I had to cross. These bridges were designed specifically for pack horses, so they had very low sides so that the horses or the mules could go across and the packs on either side wouldn't bump into the sides of the bridge. This is Shap Abbey. I'm almost to my destination for the night. It was once a Cistercian monastery, but now it's somebody's farm, but you can still sort of see the outline of where the abbey was. And then I spent the night in Shap, which probably was the least picturesque place on the trip. It used to be the high point on the main road from England into Scotland, so it was kind of a carriage. It made its living with carriages going back and forth, but the new modern highways have bypassed it, and about the only thing that's keeping it going now is this hiking trail, because a lot of people stop here on their way through. So this was a fairly short day, but you can see the terrain is completely changed. It's sort of rolling green hills now, lots of sheep pasture. We're now in the Yorkshire Dales, which is, if anybody remembers reading James Herriot, this is where those books were set, or the TV series maybe, All Creatures Great and Small. If you watch that, this is where they filmed a lot of it. And when you get here, suddenly the wayfinding is much better too. In the Lake District, they have a rule against posting these wayfinding signs, but once you get out of the Lake District, you see them everywhere, and it makes your life a lot easier. The little picture on the right, you can see my backpack sitting right there in the middle. It's actually in the middle of two concentric stone circles, which are 6,000 years old. So like Stonehenge, but not quite as impressive. So it's kind of interesting to walk past things like this and think, well, why are they here? And why did they build them? And we don't really know. I thought people, if they're interested in health and safety, would find this funny. In England, most villages had these red mail or phone boxes, which nobody uses anymore because everybody's got a cell phone. But I noticed in a lot of the villages I walked through, they've repurposed these phone boxes, and they now have the village defibrillator in them. So I guess there must be a rule that every village has to have a defibrillator, and there they are. And I put the other picture in there just to show you one of the many styles that I had to cross. So Northern England is a land of these dry stone walls, and many times you have to cross over them. So sometimes they build these little steps into them. Sometimes they have like a wooden ladder going over them. Sometimes there's a kissing gate that you can go through, but we crossed over a lot of walls. And that's the interesting thing about this trail, is most of it's going through private land. So it's kind of like the Bruce Trail, except the permissions go back to the Middle Ages. So many of these hiking trails were once trails that people used to get their food to market and stuff, but they're still on the maps as public walking paths. The church in Orton stopped here to get out of the rain. They still have their pillory in Orton. I guess people used to get chained up here when they misbehaved and were left in the stocks for a day to cool down. I just put this in because this is the hotel I stayed at in Orton. It was the only place to stay in Orton, so it gives you an idea of the kind of places that you would stay. So the next day, I was leaving Orton for Kirby Stephen, and I saw this house as I was walking out of town, so I took a picture. And I don't know if you can see above the door there, the date is 1604. So imagine a house that people have been living in since 1604. It's pretty impressive. The other nice thing that happened in Orton was, as I was having breakfast, I was invited to join another group of hikers, and they basically said, "We've been bumping into you for the last 7 days. Why don't you just hike with us?" So this was the group, and for the next few days, I hiked with these guys. So it's kind of interesting. The woman on the left is from Canada. She's from Milton, and the woman sitting beside her in the purple sweater is from Wales, but she's actually their sister-in-laws. And then the couple sitting beside them are from Australia. He just retired from the mining industry and decided this was his big trip. And the other couple that are sitting facing each other were also from Australia, but they didn't know each other. And this happens when you go on hikes like this. You end up sort of bumping into the same people day after day because you're on the same schedule, and often little groups like this form. And for me, it was great because I don't mind hiking on my own, but it was a lot more fun hiking with a group. And this is the scenery in the Yorkshire Dales. It's just rolling and green, old stone walls, tiny little stone barns. It's hard to see, but right in the middle of the picture, you can see some mounds. This was a prehistoric village. The locals call it the Giants Mounds, but it was actually a Stone Age village. Another one of these pack horse bridges. There was a lot of mining in northern England at one time, and this is a disused railway line. You can see the viaduct in the background. So there was lead mining in this area, but the mines have all closed down, but the railway lines are still there, and some of them are hiking trails, like the Georgian Trail, I guess. Another style to cross a walk. Kirby Stephen was the destination that evening. This is the cathedral in Kirby Stephen, and in the cathedral there's this interesting stone you can see on the left. Originally it was part of a cross, but the cross part is broken off and just the base remains. And I don't know if anybody recognizes the figure. It's the Norse god Loki, but he's changed to the cross. So it's obviously another symbol from the change from sort of the old Norse gods to Christianity coming into England, and sort of Loki's taken the place of the devil here. So those of you who are Marvel comic fans, there's an early image of Loki. We left Kirby Stephen, again raining. The square where the cars are parked was once a bear baiting arena. So if you can imagine, in the 18th century, they would bring a bear here, tie it to the post, and sick dogs on it, and people would bet on that. And apparently that went on a very long time until somebody was killed by the bear, and they decided it was a bad idea, and they outlawed it. This is Little Bridge coming out of Kirby Stephen, and I took the picture because you can see the coast-to-coast sign. So I've traveled 82 miles, and I've got 108 miles left to go. And this was the last picture I took this day, because after I took this picture, the rain really came down, not just heavy, but horizontally. The wind was strong, and it was actually blowing sideways, so the camera got put away for the rest of the day, and we all got soaked to the skin. It was really a miserable day. And at this point, we're crossing another sort of mountain range, which is right in the center of England, called the Pennines. And it's all peat bog, so it's also very wet. So by the end of the day, our boots were just sloshing as well, even though we all had waterproof clothing on. But the next day, it turned out nice. So when we left Kell, the sun was out, and we're into some really, really beautiful scenery here in the Yorkshire Dales. Walking through little villages like this, really nicely maintained paths and bridges. This was probably the prettiest part of the walk. I'd really been looking forward to the Lake District, but I was pleasantly surprised at how gorgeous this scenery was. And this, as I said, is where they filmed the the TV show All Creatures Great and Small. So this is where James Herriot lived and where he was a vet and wrote a book about his experiences.